Welcome to the UK Civil Society Women's Alliance meeting, talking today about tackling discriminatory norms, laws, and justice systems by addressing patriarchal masculinities. Lily, areas of work in that office include gender equality and peace. She has a background in researching and writing issues related to diversity and inclusion. And most recently, she served as the secretary of the NGO Committee on Social Development. She's also served, and I think this is really useful for us who are working with younger people, she's also served as a community organizer engaging youth and their families in educational programs designed to build their capacity to contribute to the well-being of their societies. She's worked in government-funded development projects, as well as public affairs and private sector. She holds a master's degree in public and international affairs, yay, and a bachelor's of social science, specializing in African studies with a minor in political science, a woman after my own heart. She's also one of the kindest people you will ever meet. And I hope that you will be able to, you'll find her speech really fascinating. I've already heard part of it in another space. We look forward to everything you're going to be telling us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Wendi. That was a very, very kind and generous introduction. I'd like to thank the Alliance for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here with you all. I have prepared just a few things to share, pulling some parts of the SG's report on the priority theme for this year on access to justice and looking at, how patriarchal norms inform issues of access to justice, and we'll share some reflections in connection with the issues that are highlighted in the report. So I'll speak for a little bit, but I'm hoping that there'll be time to exchange and just hear also how the Alliance is thinking about engaging in the Commission this year, some of the issues that you are analyzing, and also just learning alongside you as we prepare to engage in the Commission. So you may have already seen the SG report, and it looks at various impediments to access to justice for women and girls. And I'll just highlight a few things that stick out to me. So in the report, it talks about how implementation continues to lag for some of the legal reforms that have been put in place. I think one of the benefits of engaging across generations in this space is being able to see actually how much has changed. But we also know that there's so much more that needs to be done. So, even though formally on paper, many discriminatory laws have been changed, the report talks about how, there's, the formal equality, equal treatment in the law, when it's formalized and written, is also quite different from the substantive justice. So fairness and outcome, which remains quite out of reach for many individuals. The report also goes on to highlight some research that's been done in this area, particularly by the United Nations Working Group on the issue of discrimination against women in law and in practice. And I'll quote here from the working group. No matter how strongly the law is drafted, it is filtered through the biases and limitations of the individuals and institutions, public and private, responsible for grounding it in reality. And they share some numbers. So the working group talks about how 51 out of 92 countries by 2024 have passed laws prohibiting female genital mutilation. This is just an example of this kind of bias. However, enforcement is constrained in 42 countries, particularly where practices retain social support. So this is just one example where on paper, certain things that are harmful practices may be outlawed, but then where socially people have not embraced that change in the law, these practices are still being practiced. So, and then more generally, the report talks about how, across many different circumstances, women and girls often face common justice barriers, such as cost, distance, if you have to travel long distances to access courts or services, linguistic barriers, low legal literacy. It's hard to know what is written if you're not able to interpret those laws. Time poverty because of responsibilities in the home or in the community, linked to care responsibilities in particular. So these constraints deep in different ways across the life course, leaving girls and older women with unique and often under-recognized barriers to justice. And of course, there's also who is represented in the justice system. The report talks about how the justice sector remains largely male-dominated, especially at the decision-making levels. And of course, this has implications. So there's research that suggests that when we have more women present, particularly on the bench, this can influence how, for example, decisions made in the domain of employment discrimination, decisions around sexual harassment and gender-based violence. But it also makes a difference when we have more women in the court system who holds decision-making power within the courts and across the justice system. And this is important to understand how the law is interpreted, applied, and enforced in practice. And I think overall, and maybe some may resonate with this, women in both, the report talks about how women in both low and high income settings inherently do not trust the justice systems or expect accountability, with victim survivors frequently anticipating disbelief or inaction. So these are just, many of you may have already read the report, so this may sound very familiar. So these are just a few things that stood out to me, and I'll just share some reflections on these kind of reading of what is happening within the justice systems. So, what are the implications in some of these things? I think many of us can agree that in all aspects of life, we have yet to see what it looks like for every member of the human family to shape decision-making. So when we think about patriarchal masculinities, these are not just a set of attitudes or individual behaviors, but they are deeply woven into the very structures of our legal and justice systems. They inform who makes the laws, who interprets them, and whose experiences are believed and whose voices are silenced. They shape how survivors of violence are treated, how impunity is normalized, and how inequality is reproduced in courtrooms, police stations, and community justice mechanisms around the world. And I think the reality is that justice systems reflect the societies that create them, right? If those systems are built upon patriarchal norms and male privilege, then they reproduce inequality by design. True access to justice demands dismantling the power structures that sustain discrimination, bias, and impunity. Transforming masculinities must not only mean transforming laws, courts, police systems, and community mechanisms. Of course, that's very important, this mechanical aspect of it. But it also requires that we change our ways of thinking and our ways of doing. For it is one thing to acknowledge a value such as justice in principle. It is quite another to embrace it wholeheartedly in one's personal conduct, and more challenging still to refashion social norms and institutions in ways that give collective expression to it. So it's really like actually an ongoing process through our life course, but also throughout the society and community and institutions. Transforming patriarchal masculinities must be understood as a systemic and structural reform, essential to building inclusive and equitable legal systems, and central to the right to justice for all women and girls. And I think in this moment, during this environment that we're all living in, it's really unfortunate that the social currents across the world reveal, I think we can all see it, this growing willingness to set aside qualities of justice and equity, truthfulness and integrity in the pursuit of self-interest or the struggle for power. Arguments against gender equality are resurgent, sadly, and increasingly aggressive at various levels of public discourse. Reimagining and strengthening the societal foundations of justice is therefore an urgent need for all alike. Advancing towards such a vision involves formal judicial institutions themselves and local communities and individual people as they work to foster just relationships in their immediate environment. So it's really, there's a place for all of us in this process. So movement in this direction includes conventional theories of justice, And I'm hoping to hear those who have experience, particularly in the formal justice sector, what your thoughts are. But it also includes having extended conceptions of justice that promote healing and the restoration of social ties. So this is just sharing a few reflections, and I'm hoping that we can engage and have a conversation on some of these things. Thank you so much, Wendi.
Thank you so much for that fantastic speech. And I guess you would be willing to take questions as well as comments. So can I open the floor to those who wish to speak? Just to let Lily know that this group has been in consultation with our government office of equality and opportunities, which represents us at the CSW every year. And we've been in consultation with them today over the draft document, and we will be continuing the refining of our inputs into that conversation over time. I think because this is about justice, this CSW is about justice, we have a range of people here who might like to actually make a contribution around that. I just wonder if some of the people from Scotland might be able to contribute to this conversation. Oh, well, first, Barbara, go ahead, and then people from Scotland, they have a different legal system there that might be something to learn about ourselves.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I'd be interested to know your thinking around the government's plans for investment in whatever the legal system is, whether it be employment tribunals, the Supreme Court, magistrates' courts, wherever. There's a backlog, and people are waiting a long time for justice, and that's not helpful in terms of the well-being of society and the well-being of individuals. And I was just wondering what your thinking is around the government's plans to think about having less cases, or in terms of those that are heard by juries, and then, in terms of looking at perhaps the way some of the other cases are dealt with, whether there should be one-to-one in terms of a judge sitting, as opposed to having, a panel of judges or magistrates sitting and so on. What's your thinking around how we actually get around this problem of dealing with the backlogs and the lack of investment and in the infrastructure, and money's tight?
It's a fair question, and a lot of the research we have been doing in preparation for CSW has been looking at also how do court systems deal with different types of injustices that happen within a society, because the court system is not always prepared to deal with, especially the gender-based issues. And so I think there are many different ways that different case studies that we have found. One has been that in many societies, actually within the community setting, there's already some often practices that people have in place where people feel like they can have access to justice immediately within their community. Perhaps they're institutions that are already trusted by community members, where when applicable and if possible, the cases do actually not need to be ramped up to the formal justice systems, and they can be dealt with within the community. So I think there has to be a way to be able to sort that out. When can you deal with something with, for example, if it's a system where elders can be consulted and give advice and something can be resolved within the community, how to differentiate between that. But then also in instances where specialized courts are needed, perhaps there have to be different mechanisms that are put in place. Especially when, so for example, I think in Australia, they're dealing with this in different ways, specialized courts for GBV issues, but then also specialized mechanisms that allow for Indigenous peoples to be heard in ways that maybe the court system, I think most Western court systems are set up in a very similar way. You have the judge who sits higher than everybody else, looks down on everybody, and you have the defendant on one side and the victim on the other. And there's this separation that's created between the different parties. And my understanding is that there's experimentation happening in Australia where you can actually sit around a table and be in conversations with each other. And so that people can bring individuals from their community and feel supported in the circumstances, and so that they do not feel this kind of further alienation from the community. So of course, all of these are highly contextual and depends on the society, the culture, the customs, and so on. But often, maybe there are ways to use specialized courts or any kind of like either traditional or alternative consultative processes where people feel like their cases can be heard more immediately, and perhaps that will relieve pressure on the government. But of course, this also has to be there has to be a way to be able to sort this and assign responsibilities accordingly. And I'm sure the others might also have heard other case studies of how this is being dealt with in different parts of the world.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry, Wendi. I was just going to say thank you. And it's interesting thinking of that concept of sitting round a table, because there's, that's kind of how the Care Commission works in terms of, when things happen in care homes. And sometimes there are police investigations involved and all, and it needs, it needs an outcome in terms of justice. But they kind of do it in a round table sort of setting. So that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, just to note on that point myself, I was a family lay judge for 36 years here. And towards the end of this time that I was there, we began to experiment with sitting around a table for both the youth court. I was also youth magistrate, young person magistrate, and also family. And so sitting around a table gave a completely different vision of the people themselves as people. And I think that was you're closer to each other. There's nobody above you. Depends on the court if they have those facilities, but the court I was in did have it. I was going to also, and Nesrine has put some comments in the chat. So I'm going to ask her if she'd like to speak now, Nesrine.
I thought I should put them on the chat box, it's easier. But these are the areas I realized are very important when I was working for 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Online violence and justice is not really working properly, I think. And my first question is cyber harassment and gender-based abuse. And the second one is online sexual exploitation and abuse, OSEA. And the third one is online grooming of girls and boys as well, actually. And fourth one is financial scams targeting women. And the last one is privacy invasion and surveillance abuse. Thank you.
Hi, Nesrine. And my apologies in advance. This is not an area that I'm very familiar with. It's a very highly specialized area. But I do understand that the UN Women campaign this year did focus on issues online. And I'll be happy to look. But I'm sure also they have referenced what their research and findings are in this particular area. But one general comment that I can say is that, and I think it's not highly, and I think many of us have observed that the things are, I think what we do as people, we also move it online and do it online, no? So I think a lot of this is like, what is it that we're doing within our communities, within our institutions to also tackle the social ills that exist, because our conformity with each other, we take it on, and sometimes also online, because we have removed that person-to-person contact, it emboldens people also to do unspeakable things. So I don't know how to answer your questions, frankly, because I'm not an expert in this area, but I think there are many people who are, and then also countries who are innovating on how to protect minors online. And I think a lot of it has to do with making many of these companies accountable. You have many of these social media companies that are quite large, quite lucrative. So how is the money that's being made by many of these companies how is it being spent to protect the people that are using these platforms? And how, and also what is the governance of that? Like how are governments regulating that? Because I think a lot of it, we are human beings. I think we have shown that we're quite intelligent in the tools that we have developed. And I think there's also intelligent ways to be able to protect people on these platforms. And there just has to be enough energy and time. I think often when it comes to the corporation, that they're governed properly. And I think there's this like governance gap between private companies out there and the governments themselves. And so I think maybe that's where citizens come in, that we have these conversations with our governments to make sure that we're protecting people, particularly children who are maybe more vulnerable on these platforms.
Thank you.
So thank you for that. I don't know if we have any experts here on it. I know that it is an issue that we have today put forward to our own government to be more strongly involved in advocating for laws such as the ones you described, and also for ensuring that there's the accountability of companies and so forth for that, and also monitoring and so forth. And how they put that forward, we're not sure we're pretty sure they will do it, but because it's a big issue in this country. Susan, did you want to also bring a different perspective from Scotland?
I think we are trying to be a bit more progressive after years of not being progressive. We had the non-proven verdict in Scotland, so you were either found guilty, not guilty, or it wasn't proven against you. And that was kind of used in lots of cases for domestic violence, sexual assault, rape. And actually, women's groups and the law reform, we fed into that to try and change that, because not proven doesn't mean the person's not guilty. So, and that's what a jury system is there for. And it was to try and tackle some of that kind of patriarchy that was there, to have these conversations with lawmakers to say, well, this is inherently unfair. So finally, we get rid of that non-proven verdict. And I think that will make a difference for women coming forward, because it's not as if they're not believed, they're either believed or they're not. So there's no ambiguity in there. That might have happened, it might not have happened. So we're seeing Scotland trying to be more progressive with regards to the laws that they're making, but we also see step back with regards to like restorative justice, like for families who are no longer together, trying to get access to children and stuff like that, and using that in nefarious ways. And we're still, because that's down to magistrates and stuff like that becomes quite difficult. And women tend not to get the legal aid that they're due to actually fight these kind of things. It's similar to, Wendy, what you were saying this morning about your friend on that chat. And we're finding that quite a lot with women in Scotland, that the men tend to get the legal aid to fight this against the women. And it's not fair. But the more we can highlight that, and the more we can go to an open party like the law reform and talk to them about these injustices, then hopefully we'll start to get this movement like we did with the not proven and get rid of that. So it's about, like you say, you might not agree with the people that you're working with, but you have to try and get them to shift their views and move forward. And I think that's where, like, suspending your beliefs in such ways that you can almost do this in a way where you're not putting emotion into it to try and debunk what they're thinking is important sometimes, because they use that emotion against you, and that stops things from moving forward as well. So yeah, I think we've got a long way to go before we have justice for women across the board, but we're moving in small directions, and hopefully that, like, obviously the law is different from England than it is in Scotland, and like I was saying, it's different if something happens to you in Scotland, even if you're English, how the law works and how you've got to navigate all that system. So that's against you. Or if you're Scottish and something happens in England and it's different laws. So there's lots of different things that we could be doing to make that easier for women that we don't. And I think, yeah, it's something we need to be looking at in more depth, I think.
Thanks so much, Susan. Yeah, you know, those of us who live in England don't necessarily know what the systems are. Perhaps I can then hand back to Lily for final words to us, and we can perhaps thank her afterwards and perhaps close the meeting a bit early.
Thank you, Wendi. I've really appreciated speaking with you all. And I think in each context that we're all operating in, there are different issues that come to the fore. So it's always really helpful to speak to people operating in different national contexts. So I really appreciated this exchange. And I think maybe CSW is a little bit different this time, you know, that the agreed conclusions are being negotiated before we all arrive at CSW. But maybe, and I don't know how, you know, different groups work with different parliamentarians within the UK context, but I think that one point that was made about kind of these more theoretical conversations are very important because they then inform how we interpret, or even just at the policy level, how policy is written and then how it's then interpreted. So I think being able to have these more foundational conversations amongst ourselves, but then also with government representatives, you know, when we talk about access to justice in the context of CSW, what do we mean? Are we discussing as justice within the judicial systems as it is already interpreted and understood, or are we talking about what it means to be just, what it means to be fair, and what does that look like? Where does that happen? Somebody mentioned, you know, this also starts within individual homes also. So how are we understanding this concept of justice? Is it just punitive? Somebody does something wrong, so they have to be punished? Or are we also talking about how do we have conceptions of justice that are also about restoring these ties between us that have been broken over time? And I think there's room for both, particularly, you know, when it comes to these like heinous things that happen to people, particularly women, there has to be ways to be able to apply the law. But then also within our societies and our communities, in our homes, there also has to be a way to apply justice in a way that we are building a future society where the kind of violence that we're seeing around the world has absolutely no place. So these are different tracks, and we have to work on these tracks simultaneously. So it's really wonderful to know that there are people thinking about these questions all over the world, and that we're all part of this global conversation. So I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to be able to engage in this exchange with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lily. And I know that people are looking forward to CSW. Unfortunately, this year I'm not able to go, but I just wanted to remind people that Baha'i International Community has pretty much every week some seminar or other online, which you can join. And I joined the one that was on this very topic some time ago, and it was a very rich conversation with a number of lawyers and judges and other women who were prominent in this field. And so it's worthwhile. If you can't go to CSW, you can always log into these kinds of online places and not just listen, but also contribute your own thoughts as we have been doing today. So thank you so much, Lily, for coming. And more, as it was often said, more strength to your elbow. And looking forward to the outcomes of this coming CSW from afar for myself, but many of these people will be there and working together. And for those of you who, there's a comment in the chat that says we've been trying to create a faith and feminism group to discuss these issues if anyone's interested. Yes, thank you, Julie. We actually have one, but we haven't met for quite a long time. So it'd be useful if you want to try to call us together. That would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Lily, have a wonderful CSW yourself. And Annette, you're
Yes.
speaking.
That is amazing, isn't it? I just finally found a way
Great.
to get me
That's
heard.
good.
All I want to say is what a fascinating meeting, and I'm really sorry I couldn't contribute earlier. But I do think that the idea that we have to have discussions on the areas with which we disagree is really absolutely primary. And I do think there were some very good suggestions about how to do this. People who, including to our speaker, people who really know about how do you deal with difficult negotiations? What are the strategies? Because I'm very ignorant about it, but I know that other people are not. And I hope maybe if we feel that the differences that we're trying to get beyond are so severe that we might need that. We might need some meeting set up with a skillful practitioner of how you deal with this kind of level of difference and maybe misunderstanding and actual definite contrary views, which can equally well be held. So that would be my input at this late stage. Thank you for including me in the best way you possibly could, Wendi. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Annette. We'll see you at the next meeting of the UKCSW Alliance, core groups, and the whole Alliance in due course. For those who wish to join, please do. Thank you, everyone.